All right. It's glad to have you here today, Philip. Would you want to do a quick introduction before we get started?
Yeah, of course. My name is Phillip Thurtle, and I'm a professor in the departments of history and the comparative history of ideas. And my general topic that I study is the history and philosophy of science and technology.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, and thanks so much for showing up today. It's an honor to have you as my first guest, because I think you're a wonderful human being with a lot of great ideas and very open to new ideas and discussion as well.
That's a pleasure to hear. Thank you.
I thoroughly enjoyed your class, the one we recently took together. I forgot what it's called already, but it's the one... The world building one.
Yep,
yes,
that's right.
That's the one. There's so many cool ideas. I still remember the first animation we watched in class, the one with the blue people. That was a shock to me when I first saw it. But
Lonely Planet.
Yep, that's what it was. Yeah. Oh man. But I guess quickly diving into it, why Chid? Is there a reason that got you into philosophy? What was your kind of your career background? What kind of got you to this place?
Yeah, good question. So I was a scientist. I had a bachelor's degree in biochemistry, and I worked as a research assistant, studying molecular immunology for about 10 years after my degree.
Okay.
And after about 10 years, I started realizing that my intellectual world felt pretty small.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was basically just studying one amino acid on one protein.
Yeah.
And so I started noticing that the conversations that I wanted to have were conversations that happened more around the lunchroom table than actually around the science itself.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and that ended up being about how science fits into society.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what got you here. So then, was there an aha moment specifically where you remember where you made the decision to transition? Because I'm sure that at that point, when you were so deep in the field, there must be a lot of fear that came around with trying to get out of it and trying something completely new, right?
Right. No, that's right. So I went and talked to actually who was somebody who was a historian of biology here at the time.
Okay.
And I talked to him about the possibility of studying history of biology, and he heard about my background. He says, well, you've got a great biology background, but you haven't taken many history classes. And so, strangely enough, the class I took here was a CHID class. It was 19th century intellectual history in order to get better at history.
Okay.
And that's what, and I remember sitting down and studying in that class thinking, this would be perfect if we could include some science in this as well. And that's basically what I've done in the CHID department.
I see. Okay. So I guess just a quick understanding for my understanding and for the viewers as well. I guess so the timeline is that you started doing bachelor in biochemistry, right?
Right.
And then you started doing some research in that sphere. And then after some years, I think it's probably around, would you say 25, 26-ish, when you decided to
No, it's closer to 28.
28, okay. Then you decided to transition into the field of doing, learning more about history and potentially looking at philosophy and stuff. And then afterwards, did you, pursue a PhD or anything like that?
Yeah, so after I figured out that I wanted to study history and philosophy of science predominantly, I applied to a number of programs, and the program that seemed to have the best fit and the most money was at Stanford.
Okay.
So I ended up joining the history and philosophy of technology program at Stanford, with my primary designation in the history department being a U.S. intellectual historian.
Oh, so what is a U.S. intellectual historian?
So somebody who studies the history of ideas predominantly within the United States.
Okay. Would that include the political aspect and also the...
I would train in the political aspect, but I was mostly more interested in beliefs.
Beliefs.
How the role of belief structures our life and how the way that we go about things in our daily life privileges why we might believe in something versus something else.
I see. Okay, yeah. That's an interesting topic. I guess now that we're talking about beliefs, right? I think like the first thing that popped into my mind is that like, well, what are some of your core beliefs that you have going on day to day in terms of like both in teaching and in your personal life and stuff?
Right. Let's start with the teaching, because I've been doing so much teaching this quarter that this is primarily on my mind.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of professors confuse teaching with grading or selecting other students.
Yeah.
And for me, teaching is always about the sharing space with the student and then giving them the materials to actually figure out what's interesting to them and what they need to pursue in order to learn something new.
Okay.
Right? And there's a moment in the class that I especially like, and it often comes around when students become a little confused by the materials or sometimes even a little frustrated, like they're trying to do a project and it's not working out for them.
Yeah.
And then we talk, and then I see something switch in them. Mm-hmm. It's like all of a sudden they've kind of turned around and now they have this different point of view. Mm-hmm. And that's the moment that I look for.
Interesting.
When students then begin to change how they look at the world because of some of the materials and discussions that we've had in class.
Okay. And I guess like going off that, right? Well, why do you think that is? What? Because I think like I have experienced what you're talking about before, like where a sudden moment of change happens because of like, for me personally, is like years of building up of like exposure to different ideas and stuff, and then this moment it just somehow clicked with me. I don't know, it's kind of magical, but I don't know, do you have any like theory or explanation for why you think that is, or like what builds up, or like the procedure that precedes it and like what happens afterwards and stuff?
Yeah, and this is great because it also ties into my research, some of my research procedures as well.
Yeah.
So we tend to look at the world as just countable objects, right? And this is good for a certain type of research where you have your categories and you just need to figure out what fits in those categories and what doesn't. And that's fine for a lot of people's research. But part of the reason why I'm in the humanities and part of the reasons why I like being in the humanities is we like to mess around with the categories.
Okay, yeah.
So, like, we like to criticize them, we like to engage with them, we like to try to figure out why they're there, and can we make them more robust intellectually.
Yeah.
And so, the moment I love is, and this often happens when that period of frustration comes through, and you see that spark in the student's eyes, they've learned to change the category that they're thinking about things. They needed to, because the old category was being frustrating for them.
Yeah.
And so this is the type of research that I really like to promote in my classes.
Yeah.
And what I like to do when I do my own historical and philosophical research. Be in touch with the world, right? Which means go ahead, have your preconceptions about how the world works, but if you listen to the world, right, if you listen to the data that's coming back to you, if you feel the sense perceptions that are coming back to you, and you're up to the challenge, those are often a call for us to change how we're approaching our research in and of itself. Okay. It's a call for us to change our categories because what the world is telling us and how we should best study it.
Interesting. Okay, I guess like just to double check and make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So in this case, when you use the word category, you're talking about like our perception or like our rules of how the world can operate?
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah. Great, okay. I think that's a fantastic idea. So I guess like summarizing it up, you will say that your I guess beliefs or like your ideals about like how you hold your standard in terms of like teaching is for you to look for opportunities to change people's worldview, especially in students.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm just kind of the catalyst there. They really do the changing, and
yeah.
I just kind of provide the irritation that shows that they need to change.
I can definitely see that with the thought-provoking ideas that you present in class and all the different things that you talk about. Yeah. Then what about your personal life? Like, is there a belief or a certain set of beliefs that you think that you operate by in your personal life as well?
Yeah, and this is why I think this one particular maxim, let's call it, of listening to the world is really how I operate in my personal life. Mm-hmm. It's paying attention to those special moments where you get a glimpse of something larger than yourself.
Yeah.
And then listening to that and paying attention to what it's telling you. It's this might be more poetic than informative, but there's this great story I have about once I started doing my work in the history and philosophy, and I told my scientist friends that I was doing this work, and they'd go on and saying, well, that's all very good, but I'm at the science is really at the forefront of knowledge. Yeah. And they say we were able to actually figure out different things and how things fit into which categories. And then they asked me, what do you do? And now that you've changed. Mm-hmm. And I tell them I'm learning to count to 1.
Wow.
Which means that I'm learning to figure out what a category is, learning to figure out how multiple things, despite their differences, might be put into similar categories. And when those differences become too great, when do we need to create 2 categories, 3 categories?
Yeah.
Right?
It's like finding a boundary and stuff as well.
That's exactly right. Redefining boundaries. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I think that's one of the, I guess, the poetic part, or like the also the frustrating part about humanities to me is that you don't have a clear cut of what is a 1 and what is a 2, right?
Right.
So whereas in like math or like in like science, it can be replicated and telling like people will both agree, they all agree 1 + 1 is 2, right? Whereas like things like politics or like morals and stuff like that, it's very hard for people to both like even agree on what they mean, even just like a daily normal word, like what does it mean to be like righteous? Like people have a hard time agreeing on what the exact definition is, right? So I guess like spinning off that a little bit, what do you think? Is there would you say a certain set of boundaries that everybody should follow? Like, do you think that there's, I guess like kind of going off that, do you believe that there is a set of objective morality, or do you think that a lot of it is come back to like subjective interpretations as well?
Oh, yeah. I'm a big believer in interdisciplinarity, which also means I'm a big believer in trying to understand the different ways we already have of engaging the world, and the different ways that different disciplines help make sense of the world. Yeah, and I think a good way there's. An argument in Foucault's Psychiatric Power book, where he talks about 2 different types of knowledge. The first one is the type of knowledge of science, and it's the knowledge of replicability. So it's a knowledge that you can get anywhere. Yeah. And you repeat it, and it always comes out the same. Mm-hmm. There's a type of, but for him, that's not the only type of knowledge. There's a knowledge of the moment as well. This is the idea that there are certain moments when something hits you at a certain time where everything just makes sense. Things just kind of fall into place. Yeah. And for me, that's a knowledge as well. And so, as a historian of science and somebody who's in the humanities, I keep looking for how our countable, demonstrable knowledge of science interacts with this knowledge of the moment.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so it's when are the that's it.
Yeah.
Those are the moments, actually, I think a lot of us scholars or intellectuals or researchers, it's those aha moments that we really live for, because that's when we get a glimpse of a new aspect of the universe.
I see. Yeah. Just letting that sit with me for a bit. I think... So I guess extending on that, would you say that we will never be able to scientifically replicate or like have a strict definition of those things, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no,
right?
that's a great question.
Yeah.
So the way I understand your question then is, do I believe is there a day where science can just explain everything and predict everything?
Yeah.
Right? And I don't think so. I mean, and that doesn't, I'm not denying that science doesn't explain things. I think it absolutely does. I think it's very good at it. And in my career as a scientist, I understood actually what it took, the amount of work, and the amount of mental clarity it took in order to make a statement about the world that would stand up to scrutiny.
Yeah.
That could become one of those objects of that knowledge from anywhere.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I've noticed is every time we make a statement about how the world works, it's almost like we open up a whole can of worms with new ways of thinking about how values and beliefs can actually inform that statement. So it's not that one day we have a set of beliefs and then one day we'll become sure of everything. It's almost think about it as every time you make a statement in science, you generate new beliefs.
Okay, yeah.
And I've been doing this actually in some of my recent work, looking at the relationship between science and mythology, because that's the whole thing, right? And one day science will replace all mythological thinking, and it turns out that's not the case at all. Science needs mythology in a lot of cases in order for us to be able to bring meaning to the world, and for scientists to be able to structure what they've seen into meaningful ways so that others will understand.
Ah, interesting. Okay. So that actually ties really nicely to one of the questions I wanted to ask. I guess you touched on about like the marriage between science and mythology, right? So I guess like one of the questions I wanted to ask was, do you believe in God? Like what are your views on God? Whether there exists a God, there does not exist a God, and like why or why not do you not believe in it, or do you believe in it?
Yeah. I believe that the universe exceeds my capacity to understand it. Okay. And for me, my spiritual practice is in trying to keep understanding it. So once my daughter, her mother was Hindu. And my daughter got in trouble once when she was younger because she was with a bunch of, she was in a daycare with many Christian kids, and she got in trouble for making fun of the Christian kids because she just didn't understand the belief system. And she was trying to figure it out from this Hindu perspective. And then later on when she grew up, she asked me, "Dad, what's your religion?" And I said, "It's underlining in books." My religious practice is to underline philosophical and historical arguments, and that helps me get a greater sense of the world that I belong in.
Interesting. Okay, so I guess your belief, if I'm understanding this correctly, is gain a greater understanding of the universe through ideas both in the past and new ideas that emerge from the ideas in the past, right?
That's right. And we tend to think about ideas as coming only from within the head of somebody. But I think that's really unfair to the idea. It limits it too much in that one person's thoughts. And ideas are shuffled around quite a bit. They change. Right? And they also incorporate different parts of the world. Like, when we exchange a scientific idea, let's say on paleozoology, like in the evolutionary development of animals.
Yeah.
You don't just have an idea that comes from your head or from the literature that you read. It also comes from your field work looking at the world. So it's almost like every idea we have comes with some of the world on it.
Okay, yeah.
So it's actually kind of this really beautiful dance between our ideas as something that helps us understand the world and our ideas as, if we're in the right space, to make this inquiry, looking at our ideas as a way to help us explore the world as well.
Okay, I see. So what I got from that is that, well, I guess going off that, right? Would you argue that ideas are there original ideas? Is that such a thing, or do you say that all ideas come from something that's already within nature, but we just twist it in some form and then create it? We call it new, right?
Right. You're going to find this answer really frustrating.
Okay.
I'm going to say both.
Interest. Okay.
Right? Because
Okay.
every idea is new in some sense because
Yeah.
it's coming from you, for instance, and
Yeah.
you're stating it from a particular perspective that allows you to understand the world. It incorporates aspect of the world that other people might see, though, as well.
Yeah.
So it's both new and old.
Mm-hmm.
And it is. So in CHID, we have to do a senior thesis.
Okay.
And a lot of students come to me who I'm mentoring in their senior thesis, and they say, I'm really worried that I'm not going to be able to say something new in this project.
Yeah.
And I say, well, I'm not sure if that's the best goal. Let's help you do your research, and then let's say something that you think is an insight on the world after you do all your research. Because of your very special trajectory through the field of research and your very special trajectory through life, it's always going to be a little bit new.
Interesting. Okay. I can see where you're coming from. Yeah, I can agree with that idea.
Yep. So it's really about doing the work and not getting too worried about, oh my God, I have to say something
new. I see the original idea.
Yep.
Okay. That's great. Yeah, I have nothing else to say about that topic. I think you summed it up really, really well. I guess next is probably more of a personal question that I have.
Of course.
Well, it's not really personal in a sense of emotional, but it seems like you read a lot of books, right? Especially for research and stuff. Read a lot of papers as well, and that requires a lot of memorization about remembering stuff that you read, right? Is there any tips that you would give for people who read a lot but doesn't remember stuff? Because I think personally, I've been trying to get into reading a lot more, mostly for me these days, audiobooks, because my eyes get tired. But I feel like a lot of times I'm listening to the audiobook and I feel like I'm engaging in it, but if you were to ask me a day later, what did you read yesterday, I will have sometimes have a difficult time recalling exactly what I read. So I just kind of wondering if there's a way for you that you read that helps you remember and stuff.
This is a great question, because I think students should be taught this much earlier than they are. I learned it while I was in graduate school, but I think one of the important things to learn is that reading is not... You can't read all books in the same way.
Okay, yeah.
Right? So just imagine if you're reading a novel versus you're reading a history book. You're going to want to read those two things in very different ways.
Yeah.
And often the best reading strategy is not to read everything cover to cover right away. You want to skim the book to see if it's going to be useful for you.
Okay.
And then the ones that are really useful for you, those are the ones you go to work on, right? But even then, just always try to pay attention to the larger themes and ideas that are happening in the book.
Okay.
Because, for instance, for some books, the reason why they're books is because they shouldn't be in your head.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Uh-huh.
There's a lot of stuff in that book.
Yeah, like a textbook.
Isn't going to necessarily be helpful for you.
Okay, yeah.
When you do your work. And so there's a delicate process, and we do this in my classes. We also often have students keep reading journals. And what that does is it allows the students a minute or two after they read to organize their ideas about what is important about this book.
I see.
And what the authors are saying. So then they don't have to remember the book. They just have to remember the arguments and
the bigger pictures of it instead of like a nitty-gritty
exactly
details.
Right.
I see.
The book will always be there for you when you want to go back to it.
Okay. Just like remembering the essential theme and then like outlining the argument, I guess.
That's right. So that's the first step. And then when you become a scholar, too, you're going to need to refer to the books.
Yeah.
So the second step is when you have that big overarching argument in your head, knowing which book it comes from allows you to just say, okay, let's go to this person, see what they have to say. And then you can do some of the more delicate work of seeing exactly the nuances of each of the authors.
I see.
You shouldn't carry that around in your head.
Write it down. Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely. That's a great tip. I'll definitely start doing that. That actually reminds me a bit. Have you heard of the book Learning How to Read? Reading a book called Learning How to Read, or How to Read a Book.
No, I haven't heard that.
Okay. I think I skimmed that book a bit. It teaches you how to read a book through reading a book. I thought it was kind of funny. But yeah, there's a bit of like, it's a recursion in that sense.
It's a recursive loop.
Yeah, it's a recursive loop right there, learning how to read a book through reading a book. But yeah, anyway, great. I'll double check the audio. Seems like it's still working great. And all right. I guess now we can dive into some of the other questions that I've prepared as well. So this one, how emotional are you feeling right now? Like how emotional, I guess, like...
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess pretty emotional. We're in the middle of winter quarter.
Yeah.
It's my busiest quarter of the year.
Oh, really?
This year, yeah. I've got 2 classes and all this departmental work I have to do. And then a friend of mine actually had a recent medical episode on top of all that.
Oh.
So I've just felt snowed in and just kind of making sure that I can get everything done that I need to do.
Yeah. Definitely, yeah. I guess going off that a little bit, right? I guess like, since you mentioned it's a bit of a hard quarter for you this quarter as well. What is the darkest place that you've been to in your mind? And what is the darkest period in your life that you would say?
Okay, this is a fascinating question and one I would never have expected.
Okay.
So the darkest place in my mind, I tend to bring a little bit of darkness wherever I go.
Okay.
You know, some thinkers are romantics.
Yeah.
Some thinkers are enlightenment thinkers, always searching for the light.
Yeah.
The romantics are always searching for a relationship to nature, a special relationship to nature. I'm more of a goth.
Okay. Interesting.
So I bring a little bit of the dark with me in life. And I think that's really important for somebody who studies biology, as opposed to somebody who studies theoretical physics, for instance, because the world that we're in doesn't always fit into categories.
Yeah.
Biology is a very complex field of study, and it often is not always pleasant. Right?
Yeah.
And we tend to ignore those. Matter of fact, one of the most important biological processes we have is to die.
Yeah.
Death is hugely important, but a lot of times people in biomedical research don't give that the weight that it should be.
Yeah.
What we categorize as disease often and then we end up treating, we don't really understand some of the basic mechanisms. We understand some of the basic molecular mechanisms, but we don't understand kind of the basic. We don't have a theory of the body which can help us understand why these molecular mechanisms take place in the first part. And that is, our bodies aren't the seamless active construction that we once thought they were. Mm-hmm. Right? We're not an ideal. It's not like if anybody's studied biology and they've looked at the Krebs cycle, a diagram, and it has arrows going from one molecular transformation to another molecular transformation. Mm-hmm. That's an idealization. Mm-hmm. That happens in our bodies, but our bodies are much more complicated. So we carry a lot of darkness in our bodies along with the light.
Okay.
And so I've always considered my own moods to reflect that. I'm somebody who likes shadows and the interplay of light and dark.
Mm-hmm. So I guess in that sense, can you expand on that idea a little bit more? What do you mean by shadow?
Right. So the word enlightenment, mm-hmm. right? The very word itself suggests a form of knowledge being able to illuminate something, right?
Yeah.
We were going further and further into the light where everything will be revealed through that light.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit like what I was saying before. Sometimes when we shine a bright light, if we shine a bright light on something else, we don't just illuminate it.
There's also a shadow that
we cast a shadow.
Yeah.
And that's often the space of myth and trying to find out the wider spaces of our belief system that are going to incorporate not just the light, but how the light and shadow interact. The delicate dance between light and shadow, between humanities and science, between ideal rationalism mm-hmm. and feeling and more associative ways of thinking about the world, as opposed to breaking the world into a series of physical causations or rational laws.
I see. Interesting. That's a fascinating thought. Yeah. Huh.
So for me, I guess my darkness is kind of wrapped up in my research as well. Okay. And this, I think, makes a good researcher.
Okay.
You're always working through the world is always informing how you look at the world, and then you are always kind of probing. Yeah. From there, using the tools that you have at hand.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay. Wow, I think you interpret the question very differently than how I interpret the question.
How did you interpret the question?
So what I meant to ask was more of like towards like what was the difficult time in your life that you were going through?
See. Okay, yeah.
But that's a great interpretation as well.
It is. I mean, because I would be able to do that too. Like one of the most difficult times was when I decided to leave the sciences and study humanities.
Yeah.
But then I think when you get older, you realize those moments are not just moments, they're kind of processes. Yeah. And so it's always, you get a bit more of a perspective. Mm. And so so sometimes those moments still do happen and they're much more difficult. Yeah. But they don't seem as difficult if you understand the difficulty of, the value of difficulty in life itself.
Yeah, I see. Because without difficulties, there will be no good times as well. Because without light, there will be no dark, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like that idea.
Yeah, that's great. Right. And then how we actually allow how those things kind of produce each other.
I see. Okay. That actually ties very nicely into one of the other questions I was going to ask is how do you make sense of human evilness, I guess? Like to the extent that humans can be like evil towards each other. Yeah. Like the amount of harm that they can cause and stuff.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for this. Yeah. I wish I did. I see evil. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I see things that you would classify as greatly evil. Yeah. I also see things that are preconditions for these things in our society itself. And in some ways, they end up being good in some cases, but when they tend to be overvalued and tend to be held as an end to itself, then I think that's when you start worrying about the evil coming in.
Interesting. What do you mean by that?
For instance, we all need to make money.
Yes.
Right? But to the person who's in it just for the money, they already have set up their values in a way, so they're not going to be looking at the other important aspects of the world.
But just at what they set their goals on.
What
their money in this case.
What their other goals are besides money.
Yeah.
And it's the same way. I mean, some of the... there are some people doing research, for instance, or in the university system whose goal is only their career.
Yeah.
And so that drives their value judgments in a way, so they lose empathy.
Okay.
For others sometimes.
Yeah.
And I can go on and on. Like, the idea of competition in and of itself is not inherently a bad thing as long as it's tied to something else, right?
Yeah.
But when it becomes something in and for itself, you end up acting like a jerk to everybody else, right? So
interesting. Okay, from what I'm getting at is that you kind of when you start losing the balance and when you start going to the extreme end of trying to achieve your one point of goal, that's when that's what turns into evil in the end, right?
Yeah.
That's what causes all evil.
Yeah, and you say balance, and that's a good word, but I would also suggest the word perspective as well.
Perspective. Oh, okay.
Because it's almost like instead of having a panoramic view of the world, and which is a good place to actually be making decisions from, because you can see things that are happening. You tend to just focus into a little tiny area of this big, beautiful picture. And it's from there that you lose a sense of balance. So it's part of what my job is as an instructor is to help students regain perspective.
Interesting.
Get the bigger picture. This is what I think the value of interdisciplinary scholarship can be for students.
Yeah, just seeing something. Because I think, like, these days it's very easy to, especially when you're in your major, just dive very specifically down into your nitty-gritty of that and coming out and seeing the bigger role with different perspectives and stuff as well.
I think it's more than easy. I think it's what a lot of majors at the university are planning to do. Right? If you think about how they structure a general majors, it's like an inverted pyramid, right? Where the point is on the bottom, and you have your entry-level class. And then you go off throughout your years, and you specialize, and then you get to the base of the pyramid, which is actually the top now. And you have all these different types of specializations. And part of my job at the university is to make sure that that doesn't happen too quickly. Because if you specialize in that way, you may be able to get a job right away. But you're not necessarily going to have the life skills that you're going to be able to get promoted. Or eventually change your career later on if you need to. That's part of that's part of the notion of perspective.
I see,
So you can keep track of that little detail when you need to, but also see the large panorama so you can change when that becomes the better option.
I actually enjoy life when it comes along to it, right?
Bingo.
I think that's a big part. Definitely. Wow. That actually resonated a lot with me, the idea that when you focus too much on one aspect of things, that's when evil are created.
Well, see, if we go back to my story about being a scientist, this is exactly what happened. I felt like I was focusing just too much on that amino acid. And in order to actually get us, and because of that, my values were just limited to how to achieve understanding that amino acid.
Yeah.
And getting a bigger perspective meant saying, let's study the history of why we study amino acids in the first place.
Yeah.
Let's study ecological perspective about how these things might interact in different ways. Let's study different belief systems. I think this is, for me, this is what it means to be somebody who's engaged in the world in a way that is both wise and productive. And that is being able to move from the detail of that one thing into the wider picture when needed.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's a great thought.
Good.
I think that's a great thought. Yeah. Yeah, you answered my question fully, I think.
Good.
That was beautiful, yeah. I think you definitely, going back to what we were talking about earlier about changing students' perspective, you definitely...
Changing, all those changing of the perspectives often come about, sometimes, they don't have to, but they sometimes come about with career changes, too. And I can't... I mean, in my position as a weirdo who didn't quite fit into science and didn't quite fit into the humanities, I get lots of students coming to me from the sciences, saying, I know there's something more out there. And, they're right. And these students are thirsty for that. And just to be able to say, you know what, you can still study the sciences and study this other thing. Or, maybe you could just study this other thing and bring some of the science with you. Right? As a historian of science, or as somebody who wants to do science policy, or somebody who is an anthropologist of science. So there's a lot of different ways we can actually use science and technology are so much a part of our lives. It touches all of us in very different ways.
Definitely,
And we need a whole palette of different ways to try to figure out how it's affecting what we're doing.
Yeah. Wow. Great. Thank you so much. Yeah. I guess quickly changing gears. Because I don't want to hold you too long here. And I guess now that we talked a little bit about the darkest places and most difficult times in your life, is there what is your happiest time that you feel in your life? The feeling of contentness, or joy, or pure bliss? The
birth of my daughter.
Yeah, and how old were you?
I was pretty old as a father because I went back to school late, and then I got married as a graduate student. And then she was born while I was a graduate student. I ended up being her primary caretaker because her mother was a physician. And I was a graduate student, so my hours were a lot more flexible. But, I think the greatest moment in my life is after my daughter was born. When a child is born, they're kind of ugly. They're they're gooey. Their hair's all matted, and she's crying, and her eyes are all squeezed up. And then I started talking to her, and the most amazing thing happened. Her eyes just popped open. It's almost as if she recognized my voice from when she was in the womb or something. And she stopped crying.
Wow.
And that particular moment was, I think, the most special moment in my life.
Wow.
I know I'm supposed to say things like when I got tenure or when I became a full professor, but it's weird. Because I've always been a weirdo in the university, I've always looked at myself as an iconoclast. So when I got tenure, it was really depressing. It was like, oh no, the institution now embraces me. What am I going to do now?
Interesting. Yeah. Wow. The birth of your daughter. That's a beautiful moment for sure. I think I can relate with you on a certain level because I have a younger sister myself. She's really young. She's
Fantastic.
9. So when she was born, I was 11 and a half. So I was in the hospital with my mom actually when I saw her. Yeah, it is definitely something special, especially like this memories that you end up spending with them as they grow up.
Yeah.
And then stuff like that. Wow.
I mean, it's amazing to watch them.
Yeah.
They're like still forming. I mean, it's a biological project that's never complete.
Exactly, yeah. There's so much responsibility that comes along with it as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And for them to be able to, it's a gift.
Yeah.
Them growing up in front of us, because it gives us a whole new perspective. It's a whole new perspective on what life can be.
That is true. And I think, like, personally for me, like, a lot of it, I took another perspective for me was watching her grow up reminds me a lot of, like, when I was growing up, what I was going through and stuff like that. Just reflecting on it and seeing, like, how now I'm on the other end, how I feel and how I, like, why I can kind of understand why my parents did what they did to a degree, right? There's a beauty to that. Definitely.
Yeah, being a father has helped me understand my parents more.
Yeah.
Actually, not always in a good way. Sometimes, sometimes I get more frustrated by some of the things that they did.
That is true. Yeah.
But it gives me that wider perspective.
Yeah. There's also a deeper appreciation for them as well. Yeah. Are your parents still alive?
No.
Oh.
And this is actually what kind of comes to the dark moment question, right? I think part of the stimulus for me changing careers from moving from science into the humanities was when my father died.
Oh.
My father, he was an engineer, and so in some sense I always thought of technology, studying science and technology as a way of kind of continuing his path.
Yeah.
But when he died, I mean, just like when somebody is born, it's a gift. When somebody dies as well, no matter how close and how much you love them, it's also a gift.
Yeah.
It gives you a sense of trying to rediscover who you are in a different way.
Yeah.
And it's at that time that I started questioning this wider thing that I wanted to do. And my mother then passed 10 years after he did.
Yeah.
So I was about 40 when she passed, and that was much sadder because my father died pretty quickly, and my mother had Alzheimer's.
Wow.
So I watched her die every time I visited her. A little part of her was gone.
Must have been tough.
Yeah. It's a horrible, horrible disease.
Yeah. Man. I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you. Yeah. I appreciate that.
I mean, I guess, like, going off that, I can just, like, imagine the amount of emotional strain you were going through for, like, both these times, right? I'm sure, like, I don't know, did you feel like you lost yourself during both of these times?
Initially, but then I felt like I gained myself again.
Yeah.
Like, although jumping into a new discipline, going straight from science into actually one of the elite history departments in the country without ever having a high school history class or even a college history. I mean, I had some college history classes, but that was challenging.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it ended up being something I would do over and over and over again because I enjoy what I'm doing now so much.
Yeah.
And with my mother, that actually happened. So after Stanford, I came up here and worked actually in the CHID program for a while, teaching. But I ended up not being, there was a hiring freeze at the University of Washington, and they didn't hire me. So I moved to Canada and was actually taught in a sociology department, another discipline I'd never taken a class in my whole life.
Okay.
And now I'm teaching sociology. And they called me a historical theoretical sociologist.
Interesting.
And then there ended up being a position back here in the University of Washington, so they ended up contacting me to bring me back.
I see.
And it was during that drive from being I was at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, back to Seattle. That's when my mother passed.
Wow.
So that kind of marks a different transition. It marks a transition for me coming back to home, which is where I grew up, in Seattle.
Yeah.
And believe me, there's not many intellectual history jobs for philosophers of science and history and philosophy of science in the world. So the fact that I was able to come back home, that was quite a big gift.
Yeah.
Most people who work in the university as professors don't get that gift.
Yeah. Wow, that's beautiful. Man. Sounds like, I guess, like, from my understanding, right, now, with you now looking back at it, were you, like, would you say that you had a hard time or, like a relatively easier time getting over these, like, kind of, like, period of, I guess, darkness?
It's interesting because I think under certain types of mindsets, the notion of what's hard and what's easy kind of falls away.
Interesting.
It's just something you have to do.
Yeah.
And in retrospect, you look back and you're saying, that was tough. There was a lot of moments I was really challenged.
Yeah.
But this is kind of one of the valuable lessons of life, I think. For anybody who wants to do anything really interesting in life, you have to persevere.
Yeah.
It's not just about whether it's going to be easy or hard.
Yeah.
It's going to be both.
Yeah.
It's going to be, can you find a way to keep going?
Yeah. Definitely. That's great. I guess going off that, right, what did you think drove you to keep going forward? What was your reason, I guess?
Two things. One of them, the thing I love most in the world, are moments like this, with two people sitting down and sharing ideas together. This is something I value more than almost anything else. Yeah. And this is something that I wanted to keep making sure happens in the world. And it feeds me when I do this, right? I get energy from this. Yeah. And then the other thing is the thing we talked about with research. It's not just you and I sitting together. Yeah. It's me sitting in a garden. Yeah. It's me looking down a microscope. Yeah. That's a sharing of ideas. If we think about my earlier point about how ideas are always wrapped in nature somehow, wrapped in the world, that's a way of sharing ideas as well. So it is that conviction, right? That is not only the conviction that this is an important thing to do, then the appreciation that I love to do this that has kept me going forward.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you so much for answering that question. Oh, wow. Okay. And let's see. I think we are nearing the 1 hour mark.
Okay.
We have a good amount of time still. Okay. So I guess like a few follow-up questions. Well, I guess a few final questions near the end. It's coming back up for air, as I like to call it once in a while, because I think we dive a little too deep in some of the conversations.
We were pretty deep, didn't we?
Yeah. It's good to come up for air once in a while, right? So what do you do for fun these days?
I think that one of the things I really love doing, first of all, I love walking.
Oh, just walking. Just walking in nature? Like in
walking
city?
in nature, just even to work. And there's just something about that pace and movement and how things change around you that I really like. Yeah. But the thing I really love is listening to music.
Ooh. Is there like specific genre that you look for?
Almost everything. Lately, I've been listening to a lot of spiritual jazz from the 1970s.
Ooh, okay.
I've also been listening to a lot of dark ambient. I've been listening to progressive rock or German experimental rock from the 1970s.
Okay, what are those?
Like bands like Kahn or Faust, or these are all different German bands.
Yeah.
And it was kind of there was a very vital rock and roll scene in Germany in the late 60s and 70s, and lots of bands kind of formed.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of experimentation that happened at this time. So some of it produced bands that were responsible for the development of electronica, like Kraftwerk. Or Tangerine Dream. And then there was a lot of bands that ended up becoming responsible for the development of heavy metal.
Yeah.
Such as the Scorpions came out of that period.
Oh, okay.
And then there was it kind of developed into certain types of folk in some ways. So I like finding those, and it was the same thing with some of the jazz, the experimental jazz, spiritual jazz in the 70s.
Yeah.
The 60s and 70s were incredibly interesting periods of experimentation in jazz. So you get a return to an idea of a blackness in music, self-consciously exploring black roots by black artists.
Yeah.
And you get an idea of bringing in spiritual components. Like you start seeing what somebody even like John Coltrane in Love Supreme.
Yeah.
And that leads into, like a very new period of experimentation in jazz. It leads to funk and fusion jazz. So it's another one of those moments of great creativity.
Yeah.
And I guess I kind of, as a historian, but also as a lover of music, I'm attracted to kind of listening to all the different threads that are going together in these beautiful moments of hyper creativity in music.
I see. I actually, that ties really nicely back to your research a little on the idea, like the history. I guess that you kind of extend that to music as well, where you look at the history and then
That's
see
right.
where it comes from.
In my own
the
historical
thread.
practice,
Yeah,
I look at those moments of creativity where lots of different things seem to come together.
Yeah,
that's like a really juicy historical philosophical problem, right?
Definitely, yeah.
Because you get a lot of things merging, and new things are coming about, and lots of different types of things often.
Yeah, that reminds me of the, I think the picture, one of the lecture that we were in together, with the threads and the little dots.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, the thread of ideas that comes along and it kind of creates a world in a sense, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And those ideas in those little dots and those threads, they actually start forming kind of a landscape of ideas, right?
Yeah.
And how they're creating with each other. And so that's kind of what I think of my job.
Yeah.
Is to kind of traverse these landscapes of ideas.
Yeah. Wow, that's beautiful. Well, then again, thank you so much, Philip, for joining with me today and for this past hour. That was really fun for me. I learned a lot, definitely enlightened me in some sense.
It's been a fantastic pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
And thanks for asking such smart questions.
Of course, yeah. I can try to do my best. But I guess wrapping it up, is there any final tips or any final things you would like to say to our audience, or just wrapping stuff up today?
Keep doing what you like doing.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yep.